here. I'm Matthew Neaty. I'm representing Graceland University. I'm a junior communications and economics major, poli-sci minor. Anyway, this presentation was originally 2 hours and 45 minutes. Part of our honors program is to do a seminar class where we lead a seminar for that amount of time. I've cut it down, obviously, to 15 minutes, hopefully. The paper and the presentation is a lot shorter, focuses on just one aspect of what I originally talked about. My topic is verbal taboo. I know the thing says verbal tattoo, that's a typo. I'm actually talking about verbal taboo, George Carlin, and the power of language. So let's just dive right into it. Little story, the first time that I swore, at least in front of my parents, so the first time that they remember, I don't even remember this, but I was like in 2nd grade and I was doing math homework and it was really hard. And my sister was there, she's a couple years older than me, and my parents were there like making dinner or whatever, and like the math was really hard. I go, fuck, I can't do this. And my sister, ooh, she was upset. She knew that that was a bad word. And you know, she's like, Mom and Dad, you got to punish them. My parents didn't know what to do because you know that was the first time I'd said a bad word or a word that is taboo. And so with that idea in mind, and with George Carlin, who swore a lot and who talked about verbal taboo and not just swear words, I kind of approached this topic with asking the questions, why are some words considered bad? Why do we use and worry about politically correct language? From a very young age, we are socialized to avoid these verbal taboos. It's perplexed me why, though, because you know it's just language, and why are some words bad and others considered good? And it's obvious that when certain words can like make people so uncomfortable, words have this certain power. Like we can heal people with our power, or with the power of words, or we can hurt them. George Carlin, an American comedian, frequently said, by and large, language is a tool for concealing truth. And I think that through his comedy, he made observations about very serious topic, and that would be language and verbal taboo in general. And so that's how I approach this topic. I use Carlin as kind of a framework for actually looking at the scholarly work behind the subject. So throughout his 5-decade award-winning book publishing career as a comedian, George Carlin made a significant contribution to the discussion of the use of language, especially euphemisms and swear words in the United States. Carlin epitomized the notion that comics and other artists could have profound social influence, that they could use their creations of art or comedy to tell the truth in a manner of speaking. Overall, Carlin's comedy contributed greatly to the way that we think about language. Carlin's comedy is significant because it serves the role of making us laugh, but also making us evaluate and think about ourselves. And I'm going to kind of explore how he does that, and then move on from there. So part of his comedy and writing was devoted to the discussion of euphemism, and that's what I'm focusing on in this brief amount of time. My entire presentation is about swear words and euphemism and all the sorts of different types, but I'm focusing today specifically on euphemism and just one type of euphemism that we use. Euphemism, or using softer words and phrases to replace those that we find unpleasant. Euphemism is a critical component of what we think of as verbal taboo, what's taboo to say. We use euphemism to cover things that we find inappropriate, and our definitions of inappropriate vary from, like, if I had said, frig, I can't do this math problem, that would have been okay, or other examples which we'll get into later. So verbal taboo is an essential fact of language. Language is an integral component of human communication. Language is a form of symbolism, and symbols in language enable us to draw upon the imagination to create images of objects and ideas. And so in the process of using symbols, using and creating symbols, new meanings arise through that process. Words have a magical quality to them that allows us to create meaning. The words we choose to use or inadvertently use also have a lot of hidden power. American philosopher Ruth Anshin wrote, words are the ultimate symbols of ideas. They translate images and desires which, when thus articulated, acquire consciousness and are rendered operative. So words have a very big, very important role in how we communicate with one another. And so Carlin frequently discussed the use of euphemisms, which serve a very practical role in our language because they replace what we view as offensive with phrasing that's less offensive, but it still manages to sort of convey what we mean, but it doesn't fully convey. So a euphemism is a substitute for an offensive word or phrase by a less offensive or more politically correct word or phrase. I just said that. All right. Carlin used to say, I don't like euphemistic language, words that shade the truth. American English is packed with euphemism because Americans have trouble dealing with reality. And in order to shield themselves from it, they use soft language. And that's Carlin making a joke, but it has some serious scholarly applications as well that I'm going to get into. We shade things like job descriptions, like garbage man becomes sanitation engineer. And we can steal harsher truths than that, like euphemisms that are created to discuss the military and war, such as like civilian deaths are called collateral damages, soldiers and weapons are military assets, torture becomes enhanced interrogation. You know, the original words that we're covering up have the same, are supposed to have similar meanings to the ones that were like military assets, soldiers, and weapons, but why we use those euphemisms is because military assets is a lot easier to talk about than soldiers and assets, and we'll get into that in a bit. So we have this ability to cover and replace things that make us uncomfortable with things that make us maybe uncomfortable as well, but it's less uncomfortable than the original ones. Carlin argued that euphemisms soften language and hide meaning. Dr. Neil Postman of NYU wrote that people who are partial to euphemisms stand accused of being phony or of trying to hide what it is they're talking about. Carlin writes, euphemisms obscure meaning rather than enhance it, they shade the truth. Euphemisms are these small little lingual lies that we tell to describe objects and ideas in a manner that portrays them in a more positive light than the original language would. We have some examples up there. So what I was saying about like the media calling casualties collateral damage, casualties is a very upfront word. We kind of instantly know what that means. Collateral damage, it gives the idea of what happened, like maybe people got injured, but it doesn't really depict what happened. It doesn't really expose this universal, or it doesn't expose what we could consider truth. Naming things has certain importance because it creates this idea that either accurately or inaccurately depicts an object. Postman continues, euphemizing is contemptible when a name makes us see something that is not true or diverts our attention from something that is. So like with casualties or collateral damage, that's where euphemisms are bad, is because collateral damage makes us see something that isn't necessarily true, versus using words like casualties. When we call casualties collateral damage, we see something that isn't true, and Postman says that euphemisms are a means through which a culture may alter its imagery, and by so doing, subtly change its style. Subtly change our cultural style and priorities and values. In using these euphemisms like this, we slowly but surely alter our entire culture. We create a culture that does not want to talk about unpleasant topics. A different way to look at euphemisms, or rather this phrase is actually a euphemism for a euphemism, is political correctness. In the U.S., the words and phrases that are most strictly corrected by politicians are the ones that talk about the war and the military. Due to the relationship between like public support and war, politicians know that this is vitally important to properly name objects. Seth Lair, a humanities professor at Stanford, wrote that much of our colloquial and popular expressiveness has come out of the words of wartime. Some of the most deceitful euphemisms arise out of war. As the words change, the meanings behind the words change, all in the name of political correctness. Some politically correct phrases may be created to reduce harm to others, but when politicians create these phrases, usually, when they intentionally create, it's usually to limit harm to themselves. For instance, a semantic argument was spurred about the 1994, what I'm going to call genocide in Rwanda, where the U.S. would have had to intervene if it was a genocide, but they lingually changed what was going on. They called it acts of genocide, and so that's it was a genocide. Like one group was systematically killing another group, and that would be the definition of genocide. But politicians said it was an act of genocide, so they limited harm to themselves and they limited their responsibility to act. So that's one of the detrimental ways in which euphemisms can affect us.